Okay, round of applause for Simon, everybody.
Hi there, just a brief intro. I started programming about 40 years ago. As you can tell, I'm long in the tooth. and of course, I've been through the cycle of developing, and ended up doing a lot of stuff, designing big networks for like Pitney Bowes and stuff like that, and doing application architecture in scale, right? And this is what this is about. It's a nice segue because it's all about people skills. Because doing application architecture is about people skills. This is what most people sort of think about in terms of software architecture. I don't know if you can see that, but it's basically, you start with your server and your client side, and you break it down into software components. But application architecture looks more like this. Because it includes everything. And it's overwhelming to start with, but if you understand some of the things you need to know and how to approach problems, then you'll get a handle on developing towards those goals of being a serious application architect. The mindset of an application architect, and that's why I say it's a people skill, right, is that you are the person in control of the development of an application, both the development, the deployment, and the operation. And you, as a technical person, are going to drive the technical team for sure, but you also have to manage the whole show. And that means you have to be a facilitator. You have to enable the negotiation between the parties. The stakeholders, the owners, and the operators, and more importantly, the users. And of course, you have to also be aware of all the costs. And I'll get into a little bit of terminology there. The predominant things are capital expenses and operating expenses. And the most important thing is that you need to control the situation, and you can't do it by being dictatorial. You have to control the situation with people skills. Where do you start? Well, of course, you start with requirements. And business requirements are the topmost. And this is often forgotten in the technical world because we're all techies, so we want to dive into the technical stuff. But it's the business requirements that drive things. People buy technology because they have a business goal. And to understand that, you have to understand at least something of the business that you're building for. And that is not necessarily an easy thing to do because you may not be in that business, but you're responsible for it. So you have to be able to talk and learn as fast as you can what the business is that you are building technology for. Functional requirements are next. And in an agile world, because we're no longer in that waterfall thing of, right, we break it down completely into every detail that we can. That takes 6 months, and then we start going, okay, now how do we build the architecture to do this? It doesn't work that way. Now you come up with the major requirements, and you start breaking those down, and you work out costs, and you work out how to approach problems and how to bring in the pieces to do that. But it becomes a living document that cycles through as you do and deploy development and stuff like that. There is a priority to this, and it can be very tough at times because the real owner, the people paying the money, will often say to do things, and they'll say do it, and that gets priority. However, you still, in the end, need to be in control in that if what you are being told to do is not of value and bringing value add, then you need to find a way to get around that because you need to change the mindset of the person because they won't be satisfied in the end. And the best way to do that is, of course, is to price the hell out of what you're being told to do and make it too expensive to actually get done. Okay, one of the most important things is understanding expenses. I am not an accountant, but you have to have an accountant's perspective of what it is that you're designing. The main terms are there are capital costs. Capital costs are one-time costs. The costs are the cost of development because you're going to spend X million dollars doing a development. There's all the equipment involved, and that's a lot less now because people buy the cloud, so there's installation costs in the cloud. But if you do have equipment, you have, that equipment retains value, and that has to be factored into the overall scheme, because that equipment is paid for and then has to go into a room somewhere, and then there is that gets written off over time. So that adds value to the company because you've purchased equipment. So you need to be aware of all those one-time costs and how they add value to the company, and go on the bottom line from the accountant's point of view on the value of the company as opposed to expense in the operations of the company. They retain their value. The development cost, even though it seems to be ethereal, is amortized over time on the project, because that is a real value added to the company. That is an asset to the company. Operating costs are almost like they're off the bottom line. They affect profit. And of course, if you have equipment, there's things like space, power, air conditioning, everything else. And for cloud computing, of course, the cost is the ongoing monthly cost of the networking and the virtual machines and stuff like that. Keep in mind that in scale, the cloud is organized so that you can get in inexpensively, but if you scale, it's going to cost you. And that needs to be anticipated, the growth anticipated, because it may be more effective to actually buy equipment and put that in yourself. Then you have to pay for people as well. The most important operating cost in a modern IT world is staff, because you have to have people that are in customer service, people support, you have to have developers, because there's no such thing as a static product. Everything keeps moving. So there's this ongoing cost of staff to operate, maintain, configure, and move the thing forward. The stakeholders in order of priority. Of course, the people paying the money. The other thing is that sales and marketing, because the product manager owns the product, then they're second in priority in terms of stakeholders. But I say, and so they believe, because what tends to happen is that sales and marketing, they have gone and taken the time and effort to understand what the customer really wants. However, the customer may have a slightly different perception, but also, very importantly, the act of automation changes the requirements. And this is a cycle that you have to manage. So the sales and marketing will tend to be a bit bullheaded because they defined it, they own it. They know they own it because they created it. But you have to manage them. The next, of course, is the clients, right? I mean, this is really where the real owners of the product. And so often as an architect, you don't get to talk to the clients, but any chance you can get to try and get involved and get client input, that is a great thing. And of course, you have customer support. They've got to be able to support the site. And operations, obviously, there's all the configuration and maintenance to be done all the time, and the developers in the future. The process, and I say keep it agile because that's the most important thing. You have to be aware that what you are doing and what you have negotiated is not cast in stone. But you start from the top, you document the high-level business requirements, right? And then you do the high-level functional specs. And then you start roughing out an architecture. And that architecture is not architecture that's just software. It's an architecture that includes all the pieces. That's networking. That's the portions of software that are for support, the portions of software for configuration, if there are power requirements, if there are space requirements, fault tolerance, site redundancy, security, right away, thinking about security, the absolute must. And the approach of this, having done the high-level business requirements, the high-level functional requirements, is to do high-level pieces of all the possible pieces you can think of. And so you get this whole scope of what you need to do, and you estimate it. And this is a very important step because it's at this point the business makes a decision about how to proceed. It's kind of a scary step because the business will take it as a commitment, and you need to high-side it. But they will take that as a commitment because when you go over, they're going, well, you said, whatever, this is going to be the cost. So it's a scary thing, but it's absolutely necessary because that's the yay or nay decision made by the business. If they decide to go ahead, then you start refining. So you start taking those pieces and breaking them down into smaller pieces, smaller requirements. You start architecting little pieces, and as you go. And you just keep rinse and repeat, refine and refine and refine. And I say prototype, prototype, prototype. And what I mean is you're not building the whole thing. You're looking for key technology and operational pieces that seem to affect the whole. And you test those out. So you say, oh, well, we know we need a proxy. If we choose HA proxy, what effects will it have? As opposed to choosing another proxy. And you do some experimentation and you find out, because you can't know everything. Even if you knew everything yesterday, you won't remember tomorrow. So you go and you experiment with key pieces, see how they fall out, and you make some of your choices there. Technology, I've just sort of left this out. You guys all know technology, right? Unless you are, given an R&D budget to do what you want, you stick to proven stuff, stick to safe stuff. Don't use stuff that requires unusual staffing skills because, if you have to go out and, having built it, it's got to be maintained and move forward. You have to go out and find an Erlang programmer, you're going to be lost, right? Choose your technologies piecewise to get the job, to get the best functionality at the best cost. And that cost is both operating cost and capital cost. And the technology I leave to you guys. Thank you. Questions?
How do you stop sales and marketing from selling stuff you don't have?
That is an excellent question. You can't. The approach, though, is that having sold something you don't have, you go back to sales and marketing and say, and you're thinking about alternatives, right? A way to go, and you say, well, you've sold this. We're going to have some difficulty delivering it the way you sold it, but we've worked out a cost for that, right? And then the cost is this, and some alternatives are this. Let's talk. And maybe we should get the customer involved as well. Did I answer your question?
No, but
So we all know that for software development, you actually have certain types of frameworks, right? Like so for PHP, you have Laravel and et cetera, right?
Yes.
But I imagine that there is certain frameworks that can actually be applied as well for application architecture. Can you touch upon like TOGAF or something like that?
I don't know. That's a good question. Okay. Haven't investigated that, but having something like a mind map kind of thing really helps, like Mindomo or whatever, because then so much of that early architecture is just thinking about as many pieces as you can. That will that it's because you're going to do a balancing act. Architecture is not finding right solutions. It's finding compromise solutions. There's no perfect answer. There's no perfect technology. There's no perfect engineering. You are trading off a lot of things. For example, you're deploying in Canada, a Canada-wide storefront on the web, right? And what will happen is, oh gosh, we've got to do it in French. And, we'll set up a French translation team. But guess what? The people in Montreal that are running the Montreal office that run Quebec won't want you setting up a translation team. They will want to do the translation team themselves, right? And therefore, you have to figure out how to compromise and accommodate that kind of thing. So architecture is about figuring out what the business needs, figuring out as many pieces as you can possibly bring to the plate, and then working out what is the best cost-benefit compromise.
Thank you.
Yes?
When the business makes unreasonable request, which they for no way know how back on, which to back on, what do you do?
Well, this is kind of sort of in the same illusion as that question, and that is you work out a way to price it out of existence. That's, because you are the one. The thing about being an architect, doing architecture in scale, is that you need to make it, and you do this through talking and negotiating and stuff like that. You need to make it clear that you are the value add in this whole proposition.
How do you price things? And if they say, "Why is it so expensive?" What's your answer?
That you can always raise it, but the question, the scary part of this is what if they actually accept it?
It doesn't stop you from having to be correct in how it gets built. You still have to be able to build it.
Exactly.
Ask your question again, because I haven't answered that.
How do you price these things?
Oh yes, that I can't tell you how to predict that. But the fact is that if they have asked you to do something that's near impossible or extremely difficult, it will naturally come out very expensive by itself.
On what order of magnitude expensive?
Oh, that depends on the size of the contract. But I've seen stuff that's like on $1 million contract that it's like the price is $2 million instead of $1 million, right? And I say price it out, because a lot of that early pricing is kind of intangible, right? You're estimating, you're doing scope estimates, and you are not trying to be dishonest with the commitment of being able to build. You have to be able to build, but you high-side it, and if they go for it, that's okay. You've high-sided it. In a way, it's okay, right? Unless it's impossible. There are things you get asked for, honest to God, they're impossible, right? And you just figure out how to manage that from a sales perspective. I can give you an example. This couple had come into Sprint Canada and had said, we have this amazing business plan that nobody's thought of. What we're going to do is all those, all in Northwest Territories, etc., you have all these propane companies that are doing delivery to all those houses and cottages, whatever, that have propane, hydro stations, everything. And we're going to connect them all. We've got this beautiful business plan with a network to connect them all, and it's going to be brilliant. Nobody's thought of this. And I'm trying to tell them that, well, it's not that nobody's thought of it. As a matter of fact, everybody out there knows it. But you can't get a network connection in Northwest Territories in the middle of nowhere, right? And they don't buy it, right? So what do? Well, you go, okay, well, what I'll do is we'll amortize the cost of install of laying fiber up to wherever, right, over 10 years. You just work out how to price them what they want, and it's a reality. You can get out there. Okay, well, you need a satellite station here, and here. It's got to have an uplink and a downlink, and it's going to cost this much. And they go, oh, okay. I mean, I didn't actually tell them outright, it's not because you didn't think of it first, you thought of it first. You tell them, well, it's going to cost, right? I don't know if that's a good example, but that's the kind of thing that goes on. Any other questions?
Okay.
Okay, cool.